Good afternoon. I've been saying good morning for the past week, so I made sure that I didn't say good afternoon. Good morning today. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll be glad to tell you what anaphylactic shock is, if you want me to. It's an allergy. Like if you get a shot of penicillin and your body gives you a rash, that's a warning. The next time you get it, because the body will make tremendous amounts of antibodies and they all attack at once, it can shut down your whole system. And it can swell your throat. It can do a lot of things, but mainly it swells your throat. It cuts off your breathing. And if you ever want to kill me, just feed me kiwi, because that will do the same thing to me. I'm deadly allergic. That's the only thing I'm allergic to is kiwi. Peanuts are really bad now for allergies because people have put peanut oil in so many of the injections that people are beginning to get reactions to them. So, well, let's switch from anaphylactic shock to pigs. To pigs. I grew up in Tennessee in a Protestant home, and I ate a lot of pork. And I've got a picture at home of my father holding up a 65-pound ham. And the hog weighed over 600 pounds when it was killed. And back when I ate pork, I can't stand it, even smell it cooking now. But back when I ate pork, that was the best ham I ever ate in my life. And that was the last hams he ever made. He died after that. But he raised his own pork and everything. And I ate a lot of that. And it was served with love, and it was really good to eat at that time. And then I went to college at 17 years old, and I ate a lot of lobster, and I ate shrimp, and I ate crab, and a lot of other things. I even tried caviar once. Caviar is not a clean, even eggs from a clean animal. It's from a sturgeon. And used to, when it wasn't against the law, people got them from what's called a paddlefish. And that was in, some people call it shovel-billed catfish, but it's really not that. And you could catch those out of the Tennessee River. And it tasted just like caviar. Well, you can take all the caviar in the world and put it in a truck and drive it off a cliff for all I care. Just don't be in it when it goes off, but I don't want any caviar. That was the worst tasting stuff. It was actually terrible. I plan to never eat it again, even when I ate stuff like that. I've eaten turtle, both sea turtle and freshwater turtle. I've eaten all of those things. And then, being an atheist from 19 to 37 years old, I thought you could eat anything as long as it didn't bite you back, type of thing. And when I came into the church at 37 years old, and I'm talking about the ecclesia, the called out ones, I quit eating all of that stuff. And after I quit eating it for a while, I was in the military, and I got what I thought was some potato soup, and I've told this before. And I got about halfway through it, and it had clams in it. Well, I was sick for about a day. Once you quit eating these things and your body's not used to them, you can't go back and eat them. I can't even stand to smell pork cooking. And recently, my wife and I got sick after we ate at a Mexican restaurant. Now, we ate chicken and beef, but we think that some of the stuff was cooked in lard. And we quit eating it. And we don't plan on ever eating there again. It literally makes us sick to get a hold of some of that stuff. I went by a truck stop one time and bought some little fried pies, and I was about halfway through with one. My wife said, "That doesn't smell right." So she grabbed the package and read the ingredients. Guess what? Lard was the third ingredient on it, right after peaches and flowers. So, you know, so they went out the window or into the garbage. And I didn't feel good for about a day, because once you get through with that stuff, it's like a poison to your system. I was researching this, and this is about the food laws, and I was researching, and I came across an article, and it says the usual Protestant views. And I have nothing against Protestants. I have family who are Protestants. I have nothing against Protestants or nothing against Catholics. I just don't like their leaders, what their leaders do, and things like that in a lot of cases who know better. But the food laws were given to Israel. That is true. It was. They were. And churches are not following God's intentions if they restrict themselves from certain foods. That I totally disagree with. God's intentions were for us to restrict ourselves from a lot of things from the world. Now, before I get into this, I want to say Satan works to unify. That's a principle. Satan works to unify. He wants to unify everything. He wants a world without countries and without borders. He wants everybody the same. The trouble is, when he wants everybody the same, he means he wants everybody to follow him the same way. So, when people talk about, well, we have to have unity. In governments, people got to walk across the aisles. I guess in churches, too, we ought to walk across the aisles. And I'm like, Christ doesn't want anybody to walk across the aisles if they're not doing right. Christ separates. Yahweh Yahshua separates. Satan unifies. If he didn't want us separate, we would all be going to church tomorrow. But we're separate right now because we're on the Sabbath. So I wanted to kind of say that and have you keep that principle in mind. So he gave this article, and he calls me a law keeper of all things. Well, I'm very glad that he does, because I am a law keeper. I believe in the law, but he uses it as a bad term. I wanted to read to you some of this article. It's by Dr. Ernest L. Martin, Ph.D., and it was written in 1974, and he says, by trying to keep the law, we are not even truthful, and we become liars. So, and he's talking about the food rules. I want to read you some of this. It says, the Bible teaches that all people are sinners, even Christians who have a relationship with Christ. Anyone who studies the Scriptures, even superficially, should understand this point. Among the many verses which illustrate it is one of the Apostle John. If we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. And that's 1 John 1:8. He uses that in the article. This simply means that no Christian is a keeper of biblical law. And true enough, most denominations are aware of this fact, but this well-understood principle is not what we wish to discuss in this article. So no Christian is a keeper of biblical law. I wonder how he would feel if somebody broke into his home, stole everything he had. That's a biblical law. You shouldn't steal. Thou shalt not steal. Or if somebody killed a family member of his, murdered. I wonder how he'd feel about that. Well, that's a Christian law. But let me read on. Our interest involves those who say they try to keep the law and at the same time violate some of its simple precepts. In fact, the dietary laws of the Bible could absolutely be fulfilled in one's everyday affairs of life, but law keepers, in quotes, in almost all cases deliberately trespass those very laws, even when they say they're trying to keep them. And here we have, and he highlights it, the food laws of the Old Testament. Christ was a Jew. He followed every law. He followed the food laws. The Israelites were given a set of dietary laws at Mount Sinai. These were recorded by Moses and are found in Leviticus chapter 11. We'll be going through that. And Deuteronomy chapter 14. Today, because they almost say identical things, we'll just be using Leviticus 11. God told Moses certain animals were clean to eat. Those with cloven hooves, which chewed the cud, such as cattle, goats, sheep, deer, and so forth. All fish with fins and scales, and insects of the locust family were also clean. The pig and the camel, however, were unclean and were not to be eaten. All carnivorous birds, sea creatures without fins and scales, most insects, rodents, reptiles, and so forth were unclean. This is the essence of the dietary laws which came from God, and because of their divine origin, many Christians wonder if these laws are still to be observed. Most law keepers insist that the clean food laws of the Bible are to be observed today. And by the way, I'm a law keeper, and I believe they're supposed to be observed. And there's no such word as law keeper together. You Google that, and it'll say law and then keeper. But he made up this word for us. The laws are simply stated, and they are possible of being kept by any human who wishes to take them up. There is nothing ambiguous about these food laws. Certain animals were clean, while others were unclean. And the Hebrew of that is tameh, or tamah, T-A-M-E-H. These are biblical laws that anyone could observe perfectly if one sets his mind to do it, but most Christian law keepers are not willing to obey the plain teachings of the Bible concerning these unclean foods. They have taken it upon themselves to utterly disregard the biblical legislation, and most of them do it without the slightest feelings of remorse and their open resistance to biblical authority. How is their disobedience manifested? It is done in the plainest of ways. And he goes on to say that if you keep the food laws and you go into a restaurant where if pork hit the pan and they didn't wash that pan thoroughly and wait till evening, which we'll go over, and wait till evening, and they put some beef in there and you ate the beef, then you're breaking God's food law. So basically, he goes into all of this stuff about why you shouldn't really eat out because you don't know if an unclean animal has been cooked right before they cook the clean animal. So even if you order chicken and steak, you still don't know. And it says, and he quotes this scripture, "And upon whatsoever any of them, when they are dead, does fall, it shall be unclean, whether it be any vessel of wood or raiment, clothes, or skin, or sack, whatever vessel it to be wherein any work is done, it must be put into water, and it shall be unclean until the evening, and it shall be cleansed." And you have to do all of that. And he says if you're trying to be a law keeper and you go out and eat out anytime you want to, and somebody has cooked bacon there in a pan, and then all of a sudden they threw your steak in there, then there's a big problem. You didn't keep the law. Well, I drove here on I-35. I try to drive the speed limit, mainly because I like people running right up behind me, honking their horn, trying to get around me as quickly as they could. But there's also, I don't get tickets if I drive the speed limit, and also it's the law. But every once in a while in a 35-mile zone, I'll look down and I'm going 36. Okay, so I'm breaking the law. Every once in a while where it's 70, even with my cruise control, I look down and I may be going 73 down a hill and 69 up a hill, depending on the hill. So I can't really follow the driving laws perfectly. So I shouldn't try them at all. Well, when I get caught going to 100 miles per hour through a school zone when people are loading the school buses with children, I don't think the judge is going to take too kindly to that, and he's probably going to put me in jail if I go too far on that idea. If I tell him, well, you know what, I couldn't follow these driving laws perfectly, the speed laws perfectly, so I just don't follow them. And he's going to fine me, and he's going to put me in jail because he can't do anything else. I'm going to kill somebody. I follow the laws as best I can. I don't want to be dangerous when I'm driving. And every once in a while, about every 3 or 4 years, I do get a ticket. And the last time I thought I was in a 55-mile zone, and a policeman pulled me over, and I was 100 feet away from the 55-mile sign, but he still fined me anyway. I was going 11 miles over the speed limit, and I was totally out of town, but I thought it was a speed trap, but I can't prove that. But even if I get a ticket, the law is still good. There's nothing wrong with the law. It's me. I can't follow any law perfectly. So, but I try to follow the speed limit for safety reasons. Now, there's an underlying message in that article, too, is that we as people should pick which laws are important and which are not. And that is a very dangerous place to be. So I'm not going to murder anybody, but concerning that old Sabbath, I'm not going to do that. And concerning eating of unclean meats, I can do that. Well, if I pick and choose the laws I want to follow, then I might pick a dangerous one like, okay, it's all right for me to commit adultery. Well, families break up because of that. So recently, a person came in to work for a family member and told the family member they were under grace. They didn't have to worry about the 10 Commandments. And I was like, what about those last 6? Do you want any of those to really happen to you? Do you want number 10? Do you want somebody to get up in court and start telling a bunch of lies on you? You just said nobody really has to worry about the 10 Commandments. So, And I guess if you take that tack, then David, when he committed adultery and had a man murdered, Uriah the Hittite murdered, under those thoughts, well, David was finally coming around. He was finally getting it right because he didn't follow those old Ten Commandments anymore. You can read the stories of that and David's punishments, and Yahweh didn't think that was too funny. He didn't think that was coming around. He thought that was very serious. So Dr. Martin gives us the problem. The use of utensils, stoves, ovens, and burners are not cleaned after using them to cook an unclean food and then cooking a clean food without the washing and waiting until evening or a day or so. Now, I travel to a church in Houston every once in a while, sometimes other places to preach, and I travel on the Sabbath. Should I stop and eat if I'm hungry? I do. I try to pick the places where if they have an open grill and they're cooking bacon and eggs and steak all on the same grill, I don't stop there. But there are certain places that grill their burgers and things like that. I try to stop at those. I try to do the best I can. But I travel a lot of times on the Sabbath. And it's all right, I believe, for me to stop and eat something on the Sabbath. Now, as a law keeper, and I don't mind being called that, I also know that where I fail, I can depend on grace. Grace, I try to keep the laws, but grace takes over where I fail. If I was perfect, I came in today and I locked my keys in my car. That's the reason why I kept looking through the window. But I locked my keys in my car. And I was talking to Pam about it. I said, if I was perfect, I'm afraid if I was perfect, somebody would try to hang me on a cross. And I meant that. I can't be perfect. The only time I can be perfect is when Christ comes back. And by the way, I don't believe it's a cross. I believe it's a stake. But the only time I can be perfect is when Christ comes back and resurrects me and makes me perfect. So until that time, I'm dependent on grace. But until that time also, I'm to do the very best I can to follow his laws, because that's really good thing to do. I want to say this too, and I've done sermon on this. I picked it up from a Seventh-day Adventist minister. But there are 4 types of laws. And I want to, before I get into the clean and unclean animals, I want to say there are 4 types of laws. There are the moral laws. The moral laws take in the Ten Commandments and all the laws that apply to us. There are the health laws. And when you go to Leviticus, the 11th chapter, and that's all we'll be doing today, and you go beyond that in Leviticus, you start finding out about the health laws. If there's mold in my home, like there was in my bathroom, I had them tear out everything. I had them try to get the mold out as best they, perfectly. They got it all out as far as I'm concerned. And fix it back to where it won't get mold in it, because mold is a very dangerous thing in the home. And people are recognizing that. Well, there's a law concerning that. So there are the health laws, and they part of those are the food laws. And then there are the ceremonial and sacrificial laws. We don't follow those here. And I know Christ said none of the laws would go as long as there's heaven and earth, and I think I've got that scripture in here. But the ceremonial and the sacrificial laws are done by Christ, our high priest now. They haven't disappeared. They haven't gone. They cannot be done on earth because there is no temple on this earth and there are no high priests on this earth right now. So that is done in heaven by our high priest. All the laws still stand. Every one of them still stand. It's just we don't do the ceremonial and sacrificial. Christ was the ultimate sacrifice. The ceremonial is done by him in almost every case now. So I just wanted to say that too. Let's go to Leviticus, the 11th chapter. What are clean and unclean animals? It says, and we'll start with verse 1, it says, Now the Eternal spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying to them, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, These are the animals which you may eat among the animals that are on the earth. Among the animals, whatever divides the hoof, having cloven hooves and chewing a cud, that you may eat. Nevertheless, These you shall not eat among those that chew the cud, of those who have, and are those that have cloven hooves. The camel, because it chews the cud but does not have cloven hooves, is unclean to you. A cow has 4 stomachs. The first stomach in a cow is called a rumen. They are called ruminants for that reason, all those classes. And it takes in the cows, the goats, the sheep, the deer, and any of the deer family to include the elk and the moose. It takes in the antelope family to include the pronghorn and the mountain goat is really a type of antelope. What they call the mountain goat is really a type of antelope. All the variations of that are called ruminants. Even a giraffe is a clean food. A camel has 3 stomachs, and it is in the family called the camelid, and that includes the llamas and the alpacas. Now, you can own a llama, you can own an alpaca, you can own a camel, and people still use those in some cases, not as much as usual, but as beasts of burdens. They're all unclean animals. Doesn't say you can't touch them. Doesn't say you can't ride a horse. A horse is an unclean animal. But you can ride a horse. It doesn't say you can't touch them while they're alive. God doesn't want you to touch them or do much with them when they're dead. Okay. So these are the ones that are unclean to you. Verse 5, it says, the rock hyrax, because it chews the cud but does not have cloven hooves. Now, hyrax is about that long, and it's about this big around. It's a cute little animal. Some people think it's in the rat family or rodent family, but it's not. It's really more like an elephant, from what I can read from it. So the rock hyrax is a rather thick, rotund little animal, kind of like me, and usually about 28 inches long, weighs up to about 13 pounds. And it's related to elephants and also manatees, which are related to elephants. The manatees that are like the sea cow, or a sea cow, they call them in Florida. What's that? Oh, okay. But that's what the hyrax is. And it chews a cud like an elephant chews or whatever, or like a cow chews, but you're not to eat it. The hare has a rather long appendix off of its intestine, and the grass backs up in there and ferments and everything, so it chews a cud, kind of, but you're not to eat it. And hare is just a big rabbit type of thing. Bugs Bunny was a hare, by the way. He used to look like a hare in the original cartoons. My father got kind of concerned because I was always watching Bugs Bunny even when I was a teenager. I'd watch him now if I could. So he was like, why do you watch him? I said, who else can stand in front of the Tasmanian devil, eat a carrot, and say, what's up, Doc? I mean, you know. And I said, he's my hero. But in the original ones, he looked more like a hare. In the other ones, he looked more like a rabbit in the later ones. The swine, it divides a hoof, has cloven hooves, but it does not chew a cud and is unclean to you. And a pig has a simple stomach. And a lot of diseases that mankind can get, a pig can get, vice versa. Their flesh you shall not eat, and their carcasses you shall not touch. They are unclean to you. These you may eat that are in the water, whatever has fins and scales, whether in the seas or in the rivers, that you may eat. And people ask me, if I eat the eggs out of, I've had somebody ask me that, out of a fish that has fins and scales, is it okay? Well, I guess so, except if you eat gar eggs, they're poisonous. I don't eat fish eggs because I don't know which ones are good or not. I stay away from those. But in the seas or the rivers that do not have fins and scales, you don't eat anything that doesn't have fins and scales. A crawfish, my wife's from Louisiana, a crawfish doesn't have scales. It's really not any kind of fish at all. It's a crustacean. They are an abomination to you. They shall be an abomination to you. You shall not eat their flesh, but you shall regard their carcasses, and that's after they're dead, as an abomination. Whatever in the water does not have fins and scales, they shall be an abomination to you. And these you shall regard as an abomination among the birds. They shall not be eaten. Now here he changes Because instead of telling you what you can eat primarily, he says what you can't eat, so he leaves the other birds that you can eat. So you're not to eat the eagle, the vulture, the buzzard, the kite, and a kite is something that looks kind of like a hawk or a falcon. And the falcon after its kind, every raven after its kind, the ostrich, the short-eared owl, the seagull, and the hawk, the little owl, the fisher owl, the screech owl, the white owl, the jackdaw, and the carrion vulture, the stork, the heron after its kind, the hoopie, or hoopoe, and the hoopoe, it's pronounced hoopoe, W-H-O-P-O-E. It is a kind of a salmon pink-colored bird, and it has a great big crust on its head, and a long, sharp bill, and it's curved. And it's got a crest that sticks up, and it has black and white wings and a tail. And I saw a picture of one, and I've never seen one personally. It's Europe and Asia, Eurasian type of bird. But you're not supposed to eat that either. And the bat, they included the bat. We know a bat is a mammal, but they included it in the flying birds. All flying insects that creep on all fours shall be an abomination to you. Yet these you may eat of every flying insect that have jointed legs above their feet and leap on the earth. These you may eat, the locust after its kind, the destroying locust after its kind, the cricket after its kind, and the grasshopper after its kind. But all other flying insects which have 4 feet shall be an abomination to you. Now, the grasshoppers are okay. I ate 2 one time, not counting the ones that flew in my mouth when I was riding my bicycle at night when I was a kid. But I was stationed in Korea when I was in the military, and this gentleman who was Korean took me out to eat at a Korean restaurant. And I knew that grasshoppers were a clean food, so I got 3 of them. And if you don't like a gift, and he insisted on paying, he wouldn't let me pay. In Korea, if you don't like a gift that somebody given you, it's their fault, and they feel very guilty over it. And I didn't know he was watching me. I ate 2 grasshoppers that were barbecued. They actually didn't taste bad. I picked up the 3rd. I looked at it. The longer I looked at it, the bigger it got. So I put it down in the plate. And he touched my arm, and he said, used to, the grasshoppers were much better here, much bigger, and much more juicy. I didn't have the heart to tell him that I just couldn't eat them. Okay, that was my thing. They're really not food to me, even though God says they are, and if I was starving, I'd definitely eat grasshoppers, but I just couldn't get the 3rd one up there. Now, by these you shall become unclean. Whoever touches the carcass of any of them shall be unclean until evening. Whoever carries part of the carcass of any of them shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. The carcass of any animal which divides the foot, but is not cloven hooved, or does not chew the cud, is unclean to you. Everyone who touches it shall be unclean, and whatever goes on its paws among all the animals go on all 4s, these are unclean to you. And it's talking about the carcass here. It's talking about the dead animal. Remember, Christ rode on a donkey's coat. If he rode on a donkey, that's an unclean animal. He didn't have a problem riding on it. He just didn't want to be around it if it's dead. Whoever carries any such carcass shall wash his clothes and be unclean until evening. It is unclean to you. These also shall be unclean to you among the creeping things that creep on the earth. The mole, the mouse, and the large lizard of its kind, the gecko, the monitor lizard, the sand reptile, the sand lizard, and the chameleon, and that includes the amphibians. Now, and if you want to know what a gecko is, just watch the government insurance company. They have the little gecko on there talking. Now, reptiles not only include snakes and lizards, but turtles, crocodiles, alligators, and others. Salamanders are not mentioned, but it's understood that they're not good to eat. Now, from this chapter, and Tom Bradford, I was listening to Saturday evening Torah studies as part of this too. From these simple scriptures, the Jewish people have taken it to such an extreme and have kosher kitchens, and they have done so much that is really not rules for us and not in the Bible, but they have made it so burdensome to have a kosher kitchen according to them. If you eat a kosher hot dog, you're really eating only from half the animal forward. You're not eating from half the animal backward. And I really like sirloin steaks the best, so I'm probably not going to do that. But if you get a package of kosher hot dogs, you will probably see that half the cow is missing and only the front half is filled in. That's kosher to them, okay? There's nowhere in the Bible that says that. It says, oh, thank you. I thought I brought mine up here, but I guess I didn't. There's nowhere in the Bible that says you can't eat the back end of the animal, okay? And that comes from when Jacob was fighting with the angel, and the angel put his hip out of place, and they decided they wouldn't eat anything from around the hip. And I guess in order to make sure they didn't do it, they're going to eat from half the animal forward. They also come up with you can't put milk in a pot. If you ever put milk in a pot, even though you wash it, you cannot put meat in that pot. So you have to have two separate pots. I asked a lady one time why she kept a kosher kitchen, because she was a Messianic Jew. And if you want to know where the thing about mother's milk is, it says in Exodus 23:19, we don't have to turn there unless you want to, but it says you should not boil a calf in its mother's milk, or a young goat in its mother's milk. So they take that, and if you have milk in a pot, you can never use it for meat. If you have meat in a pot, you can never use it for milk or any milk product. So I asked her, I said, why do you keep a kosher kitchen? Because I had read the Torah, and I said, I can't find anything in the Torah that says this. And she said, we do it because we show God we love him more than other people. That was her answer. And I was like, I don't want to make up a rule and try to keep it. If God didn't give me that rule, I don't want to try to make up a rule and keep it, because, you know, even in Revelation it says you should not add or take away from God's word. So that was her answer. And I didn't go into any detail with her or anything. I just honestly wanted to know her answer, and I was very respectful of it. Unclean animals, we can touch them. We can use them. We can plow with them. I have I have 3 cats at home, and I love my little cats. I've had dogs. I love my dogs. It's all right, as long as I don't touch them when they're dead. But recently I lost a cat. It died. He was very old, and he died. Now, was I supposed to let him lay in the yard and not bury him? I mean, you can't throw common sense out the window. And, you know, it becomes something for infection. It becomes something very unclean as he decomposes. So I wrapped him up as best I could, dug a hole, buried him, put rocks over it so nothing would dig him up, and that was it. Now, what was I to do? Well, I touched an unclean animal that was dead. So my clothes needed to be washed. I needed to be washed. I needed to take a bath. And a lot of uncleanness can be taken away by bathing. If you go through, a lot of the rules of cleanliness are corrected by bathing. And the bath is very important. When I worked as a nurse, and I retired this year, but when I worked as a nurse and a person died, I had to take care of that person, and I had to do it respectfully. So I had to handle a dead body. Well, handling a dead body makes you unclean. Well, even if it's a dead human, it makes you unclean. But I had to put that body on a gurney. I had to take it down, I had to take the body down, put it in the morgue. I, talk with the family and all of that. Well, was I supposed to do when I got home? I found out very quickly that if I took a bath and I washed my clothes, and when I lived in an apartment, I didn't have a washing machine, so I would separate my clothes and then wash them later. But I got them put away somewhere. I found that I didn't have many problems, and I had a lady come up to me, and she said, I had all kinds of problems after handling that body. I had bad dreams and all of that, and I don't even know what faith she was. And I said, did you take a bath and wash your clothes and all that? She said, no, I didn't. I said, well, you should. The next time we had a dead body to move, a dead person to move, she did that, and she said, I'm amazed. It didn't really bother me. I didn't have any bad dreams or anything. And I talked to other nurses, too, and they told me that if they take a bath, they don't have all the problems. And you're dirty until evening, and then you start a new day. It's clean, and that's spiritually clean. So if I go out, if I have a dead animal, such as a dead raccoon or something, I only wish, because they're tearing up everything in my house. But I try to live trap the poor things and take them away, but I'm thinking about killing them, and I really don't want to. But if one dies, you know, it's almost time for a party. I talked to this guy one time, and he said, I kill every raccoon I see. And I said, I don't hate them that much. He said, they got into my roof, and they tore up everything. Well, they got into one of my buildings. They tore the insulation up so bad that I have to take a corn scoop to get it out. And 2 of them died in there from eating the insulation. It is taking forever for me. I started months ago, and I haven't got that building clean yet. Okay, so, and now I understand, but I still try to live trap them and take them away. Should a veterinarian who has to put animals to sleep sometimes as mercy, and I've had to have animals put to sleep because they were dying, and I didn't want them to go through suffering anymore. Can they be a Sabbath worshiper? Can they follow the law? Of course. They just need to take a bath and wash their clothes, and they'd be spiritual clean till evening. Now, that to me is very important. In verse 46, it says, this is the law of the animals and the birds and every living creature that moves in the water. And this is Leviticus 11th chapter, verse 46. It says, this is the law of the animals and the birds and every living creature that moves in the waters and of every creature that creeps on the earth, to distinguish between the unclean and the clean, and between the animal that may be eaten and the animal that may not be eaten. Now, he said all of that so that we know the difference between unclean and clean. Now, one time I had this beautiful bread bowl. Huge thing. I've never found another one like it. And it was made of pottery. It had been fired. It was made of pottery. And I kept it out of the kitchen because it was so big. And I went to get it one day, and an animal had urinated in it. And I almost cried. Because, and I've been to every junk store I can go to, and I can't find another one. But, antique store, pardon me. But I broke it and threw it away. Some people might have said I could wash it, but they don't put that much Clorox for me to even think about it, so I broke it and threw it away. See, I do the best I can, and I don't want something that's had that in it, making bread or anything in the house, so I just broke it up and threw it away. Now, there's another thing, too. We should follow the food rules. We should follow the laws of cleanliness. But when my mother-in-law comes, my mother-in-law doesn't believe as I do. And I may get highly criticized for this. Every once in a while, she wants a ham sandwich. So we let her put ham in our refrigerator. She knows we're not going to eat it. But also, when I go to my mother-in-law's house, she may cook beef or something like that, because she knows we're not going to eat pork. My wife and I don't eat pork, and she still does. If she cooks in that same pot, am I supposed to say, hey, I don't even want it in the same pot? No, I'm going to sit down and eat it out of respect to her. She's not going to put any bacon in the beans. She's not going to put anything in there that'll bother us. She's doing the very best she can. I'm not going to dishonor her home by saying, you know what, that's really a rule, and this morning I saw you cook bacon in that, and now you cooked my eggs in it, but she washed it. Now that's me. I believe you can take it to an extreme, and I think you can be very disrespectful for somebody who's trying to do the best they can for you. So if she wants ham in our house while she's staying with us, then we keep it away. You know, it's from the other foods. It's put into a plastic bag and stuff. But if that's what she wants, then we let her have it, because she's living with us sometimes now. We're not going to eat it, and she knows that. And I think that's the very best we can do, because we've already separated ourselves, and she knows we're not going to eat it. Thank God she doesn't eat crawfish. So, let's go to Mark, the 7th chapter, the 18th verse. One of the most misquoted scriptures in the Bible. Mark 17:18. I'm sorry, Mark 7:18. I'm sorry. I can't even read my own stuff anymore. Mark 7:18. If you find Mark 17, I want to read it. But anyway, Mark 7:18, where it says, "Are you so without understanding also? Do you not perceive that whatever thing," and this is Christ talking, "whatsoever thing from without entereth into the man, it cannot defile him, because it entered not into his heart, but into his belly, and goes out into the drought, purging all meats." So, according to this scripture, because Christ said it's not what enters your mouth, it's what enters your heart, now we can eat all meats. We can eat all foods. Well, and some translations go as far as to say Jesus declared all foods clean with this statement, and you'll see that in a lot of translations in parentheses, meaning he never meant it that way. Yours is that way, Robert? Yeah. Yeah, some translations will even say that, but that's not really translated from the Bible. That's somebody's opinion. Now, what Christ was talking about, they'd asked him, "Are your disciples eating with their hands unwashed?" Well, they meant traditional washing. You know, you had to wash your hands, and then if you did something else, you had to wash your hands and all of this. Well, they were eating, and Christ said, "I'm not worried about this. This is one of your laws. This is one of your traditions. I'm not worried about this," is what he's saying. If they get a little dirt on it and it goes into their mouth, so be it. It's going to come out in the other direction. Okay. But they're saying, oh, Christ meant that we could eat unclean foods now. He says there's nothing distinguishing now unclean from clean. Well, Christ is always the same, today, yesterday, and forever. So when he says unclean foods, that's what he means. Besides, Christ was a Jew. He would not eat anything in the way of a pig or anything like that. It wasn't food to him. So the King James Version in most cases has it where he doesn't declare it clean. But Christ would have never said, therefore you can eat pork. That's not what he was saying. And the emphasis was not on the emphasis was on the cleaning of the hands and the traditions of man. And unclean and unclean animals are not the traditions of man. They're God's laws. Let's go to Daniel 1:8. Daniel, the first chapter, the 8th verse. And some of these, I lost my King James Version. I found it in the church today. So I actually copied it down off the internet because I wanted the King James Version here. Daniel, the first chapter, the 8th verse. Okay, it says, "But Daniel proposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs," and Daniel was a eunuch, he didn't have his reproductive organs anymore, "that he might not defile himself." Now Daniel knew that he would be defiled by the king's unclean meats. And he probably didn't like them because they might have been pork, they might have been, even in that area, snake or beetles or whatever. He didn't want to eat that, so he just decided he would eat vegetables and drink water, and he didn't want his wine either. It might not have been about the alcohol, it might have been something else, but he didn't want to defile himself and make himself unclean. And that would be considered both a physical and a spiritual defilement. And there is a word, and we'll get into it in a minute, called common, that's also connected with unclean animals. Let's go to Acts, the 10th chapter, and we'll get the other one that is totally misquoted by a lot of churches. Acts, the 10th chapter, and we'll begin reading with verse 9. And it's talking about the disciples. Acts 10, 9 through 13. 9 through 23 is what we'll be reading. And it says, "The next day, as they went on their journey and drew nigh to the city, Peter went up on the housetop to pray about the 6th hour. And he became very angry and would have eaten. But while they made ready, he fell into a trance, and saw heaven opened, and a certain vessel descending unto him, and it had been a great sheet knit at the four corners, and let down to the earth, wherein were all manner of four-footed beasts on the earth, and wild beasts, and creeping things, and fowls of the air, and they were unclean. And there came a voice that said, Rise, Peter, kill and eat. But Peter said, No, so the eternal, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean. So he describes them as both common and unclean, or common or unclean. And the voice spake unto him again the second time, What God hath cleansed, then call now not thou common. This was done 3 times, and the vessel was received up again into heaven. And then it goes on, Peter was summoned to Caesarea. Now while Peter doubted in himself what this vision which he had seen should mean, behold, the men which were sent from Cornelius had made inquiry for Simon's house, and stood before the gate, and called and said whether Simon, which was surnamed Peter, was lodged there. While Peter thought on the vision, the Spirit said unto him, Behold, 3 men seek thee. Arise, and therefore, and get you down. Go with them, doubting nothing, for I have sent them. Then Peter went down to the men which were sent unto him from Cornelius, and said, Behold, I am he whom you seek. What is the cause wherein you are come? And they said, Cornelius the centurion, a just man, and one that fears God. And centurion would mean he was Roman. He was Roman military. He was over a certain number of men. And of good report among all the nations of the Jews, was warned from God by the holy angel to send for you into this house, and to hear words of you. Then called he them in, and lodged them. And on the next day Peter went away with them, and certain brethren of Joppa accompanied them. Now I read through verse 23 because here Peter was hungry. He was waiting for the meal. He was on the rooftop. He was asleep. He had a dream. Down came a sheet. Had all kinds of pigs or whatever in it, snakes or whatever, but they were unclean animals. And a voice said, Get up and kill one of these, or get up and kill several of these and eat them. And it did it 3 times. Peter said, I don't eat anything like that. I'm a Jew. I've never eaten anything like that. I won't eat something like that. Well, the emphasis was not on the food. Peter was thinking maybe it's the food at first, but then he got to thinking about it, and it was about the Gentiles. He was to carry the word to the Gentiles. The food was nothing more than an example or a metaphor. There would be nothing more disgusting than a Jewish person, because I don't do it anymore either, and it would be disgusting to me. I walked into a business. It wasn't even a business where you would buy food. You buy something else. But I walked into a business, and all I could smell was pork cooking. I don't know if they were cooking it in the back or not. I didn't even want to be there. I got out of there just as quickly as I could. I couldn't even stand to smell it. So Peter, nothing more disgusting to him than getting up and trying to kill a pig and eat it. Okay? So that's the way they thought of the Gentiles. The Gentiles, before, if you wanted to be a Jew, you had to go live with the Jews. You had to go to their temple. You had to do the things, or as much of the temple as you could. You had to do the things the Jews did. But now, all of a sudden, spiritually, you could come in. You could be a Jew. And Peter was to carry this word to the Gentiles. And it wasn't about the foods at all. Now, what is unclean? Well, Noah was given 7 clean animals, and then of each clean type, and then 2 of each unclean. And that was because of sacrifices and things like that. Now, what is food? Let's go to Romans 14:14. Here's another one that is used many times, and there's several others, but we'll only do 3. Romans, the 14th chapter, the 14th verse. As one who is in the eternal Jesus, this is Paul, I am fully convinced that no food is unclean in itself, but if anyone regards something as unclean, then for him it is unclean. The word here is food. Paul would never think of a rat as being food. It's not food. He would never think of a squirrel being food. I ate squirrels when I lived in Tennessee. That wouldn't be food to him. And it's about food that was offered to idols and things like that. But he would never think of a pig as food any more than I would think of a grub worm as being food, even when I was, not in the church. So it's about food being offered to idols. Now, unclean animals, after the flood, and before the flood, they didn't. I won't go into it very much, but before the flood, from the indications of the Bible, they were probably vegetarian. After the flood, we were told to eat animals, and we could eat certain animals. And I think that had to do with, there's a lot of theories on that, spiritual things and things like that about it. But that's a longer subject. What is common? Common means exactly that. It's not unusual. It's passé. It's people are common. Sunday worship is common in this country. We're uncommon because we worship on the Sabbath. Christmas and Easter are common in this country. We're uncommon because we don't do them, but we do God's holy days. Passover, Feast of Tabernacles, Feast of Trumpets, those. Remember, at the first of this, I said, Christ separates, the world unites. They're trying to rebuild the Tower of Babel as I see it in the news as we speak right now. We want to be spiritually pure. We're not going to be completely pure, but the food laws are part of keeping ourselves pure. God does not want to come back. Christ does not want to come back to get a bride that's dirty. He wants to come back, get in the first resurrection, and pull up his ecclesia, his called out ones that are clean, that have separated themselves from the world. I won't be totally clean. He'll have to clean me up and make me a spiritual being, but I will try to do whatever he says. He's also my king. Now I'm going to tell you the answer about what really denotes a clean animal from an unclean animal. I'm going to tell you all their characteristics and everything. Okay, are you ready? I have no idea. Okay. I have no idea. The manufacturer put out a recommendation. I have a shotgun at home, and on the barrel it's stamped, do not shoot slugs or solid projectiles. It just says slugs through this barrel. I've had people tell me, oh, you can do that. I even had a person who worked on guns that I respected very much say, you know, you can shoot solid things through that barrel. And I said, order me another barrel. He ordered me a slug barrel, one that I could shoot it through. He said, why won't you do that? I said, the one who made it said, don't do it. The only best answer, because I don't know what denotes clean from unclean, except what God says. The one who made it said don't eat it, or the one who made it concerning unclean animals said don't eat them. That's all I know. Because an elephant eats grass and is relatively clean looking to me, whereas a chicken, which is clean, is the dirtiest animal I have ever seen on the farm. And if you've ever owned chickens and see what they'll pick, you may never eat another chicken. I do not know why a chicken is clean and an elephant is dirty, okay, or unclean. I do not know. So I just know what God says. And that's what I do. I eat chicken. If you marry one of the people from my wife's family, you will eat chicken, okay, because that's what they like the most. And every once in a while we'll have a roast, but most of the time we eat chicken. I'm the Forrest Gump of chicken, if you want to know how many ways to make it. And my brother-in-law is too. We went through that one time. But it's about spiritual purity. I've eaten lard by accident. Lately I told you about it. I prayed about it and went on. And didn't eat any more, try not to eat any more lard. I read packages to know, like if you buy vegetarian baked beans, well, if you want to buy something that's not vegetarian, you have to read the label. A lot of times it's got lard or pork in it of some kind. I'm doing the best I can, but if I make a mistake, I just pray about it, ask forgiveness, and go on. The more we follow God's rules, the more He can trust us. The more we declare Him our King, the more He can trust us. And I don't want to be one who says that God's laws are not important, because they're all important. Grace comes when you really mess up, but God forgives. What is in our hearts will translate to our actions. If it's in our hearts to follow God, then it will translate to our actions. If somebody sees me doing something I'm not supposed to be doing, tell me. I'll evaluate. If I'm wrong, I'll admit I'm wrong. I'm not perfect. Satan unifies. Everybody should eat pork. It's okay now. Well, I don't do it. Everybody should do Sunday worship. I don't do it. Everybody should do Christmas. I don't do it. And you don't do it either, because you're separate. Christ wants us separate. He wants His bride separate. He wants His bride clean. And I'm talking about when He comes to get us. As far as being a law keeper, I want to be a law keeper. And when Christ comes back, I want Him to find me keeping the law as best I can.